We'll take the second part of our discussion. See, ecological tools for environmental protection and ecosystems. What are those ecological methods which can be used for restoration of our ecosystems? See, our aim is we should not forget the quality of life. Biodiversity and ecosystems, they are the foundation of all ecosystem services. We have discussed these kind of services. The supporting services are the most critical services which lead to the different kind of benefits, regulating services, cultural services, and so on, which are direct. Some of the direct benefits are also dependent on these ecosystems. But the goal is quality of life. So what is the quality of life? We must have security. We must have basic material for good life. We must have health security and good social relationship. See, it's important to know that our economic indicators are quite strong. There is no doubt. But at the same time, when we say that basic material for good life, for example, so we are surplus food available, but is it available to all? If it is available to all, then is it nutritious and free of toxins? And so that means accessibility of food and the quality of food also makes a difference, but it's a challenge because insecticide, pesticides are very common in most of the food products. And if you look at the health security, whether your health security is available to all, that means there is a challenge of social equity. Take example of security. If because of natural calamities, the people have to move, the whole communities have to move from coastal areas or many other areas to the other area, whether they are rehabilitated in time and they restore their quality of life. So these are some of the challenges, but these are the basic fundamental benefits from ecosystem. Ultimately, the ultimate goal of good quality of life is freedom of choice and action. If we have freedom of choice and action, only then we have good quality of life. Otherwise, we'll be struggling hard to receive and maintain the basic amenities like security, basic material for good life, health, and social relationships. If we are struggling hard with each other and competing with each other for these basic materials, then we cannot have good social relationship, let me tell you. And then if we are competing in a very negative way, that means we don't have freedom of choice and action. So our ultimate goal is freedom of choice and action. And that happens only if our environmental health and ecosystem health is good and healthy, let me tell you. Otherwise, we are struggling hard for our basic amenities. So our aim is freedom of choice and action. And if you look at the sustainable development goal, so there are many goals like social benefits, for economic growth and so on. But look at the UN has announced these sustainable development goals, 17 different goals, but the foundation remain the ecosystems or biosphere. Healthy water, healthy soil, healthy living organisms, and healthy water and air. So if we have strong foundation of our environmental health, only then we'll be able to achieve all other goals of social equity and social improvement and economic growth. So foundation remain our ecosystem health. Now, some of these, I told you the ecosystems are degraded and contaminated. This is one of the sites in degraded abandoned mines in Delhi. There are more than 4,500 hectare land which is degraded like this. And yes, economic benefits are important, no doubt. Mining is important for our economic growth, no doubt. But at the same time, once the mining is over, we must restore these degraded mines and abandoned mines into biologically productive, socially relevant, and economically useful site. Otherwise, they will become environmental and economic burden on the human society. And look at some of these sites are even 50 years and 100 years old. They remain degraded and contaminated. Surface albedo is very high. Ambient temperature is very high. Organic matter is low. Soil layer is thin or absent. The toxic metals are high. Nutrients are low. Moisture is low. So that means such site represents a very harsh environment for any living organisms to survive. So such sites need special treatment. Afforestation, reforestation, plantation program cannot succeed. And they have failed, in fact, throughout the world, they have failed. They are not able to convert such sites into biologically productive sites or socially relevant sites. For restoration of these sites, we must rely on ecological principles. The nature-based solutions we need to evolve. Only then we can convert such economic burden or environmental burden into the most useful, relevant, beneficial sites. And the principle lies here. See, if you look at any degraded or contaminated sites, you will find there are altered plant communities. When I'm saying altered plant communities, that means that either these plant communities, the natural communities are lost, or the species composition have changed. Some of the species have become more dominant, like VD communities and so on. And the native communities, they have gone down. So alteration of plant communities, you can see visibly, and similarly, the alteration in insect or animal and invertebrates community. You can see, you can visualize it. But there are another important change which happens in such sites, which are usually invisible. We don't see from eyes. That is loss of microbial communities. The microbial communities which are relying on in the which they live in beneath the soils, and they are the life supporting living organisms. Let me tell you, we know it today that life, these microbial communities drive the life supporting process even at the global level. That all those biogeochemical cycles are driven by microbial communities. So once these microbial communities are lost, which drive the nutrients, which helps in soil formation, which helps in plants to grow in such harsh environment, if they are lost, no plantation, no vegetation, no afforestation program can succeed. So that means if we need to restore these ecosystems, we need to restore these microbial communities, because once they are lost, the ecosystems lose its resilience. The resilience is an ability of ecosystems to restore back its properties, structure, and function once there is external pressure is over. But when the external pressure is high, like any extreme economic activities, and if these microbial communities are lost, that means ecosystem lose its resilience and it cannot restore back. So if we want to restore back to its original form, native form, we must focus on what are those microbial communities which can help in the restoration of ecosystems. So that's the most important and critical part. And restoration practices and ecological restoration focus on what is known as rhizosphere engineering. When I'm saying rhizosphere engineering means the plant roots has a very unique environment which is known as rhizosphere, and that is because of plants release certain exudates into the soil, and these exudates promote very useful bacteria into the soil, and microbes help the plant to survive, and microbes use the root exudates for their survival. So there is some kind of associations and symbiosis which happens in the nature, and that's how these plants and microbe they survive together. But once in because of degradation and contamination, there is a loss of microbial communities or alteration in microbial communities, no plants can survive. So we rely on rhizosphere engineering using those microbes. These microbes help in mobilization of nutrients, solubilization of nutrients from insoluble complexes. They control the pathogens into the environment, which otherwise infect our plants. So they help the plants to improve its immunity. In return, plants also help the microbes for their survival. So such plant microbe associations are useful in restoration of degraded habitats and contaminated habitats. So restoration ecology can do the wonder by restoring the soil biological processes and restoring the ecosystem. That has been done by the different parts of the world, by different scientists and restoration ecologists when they introduce the plants and microbe into those the degraded sites which I have shown you. So restoration has happened, restoration has been done. And when I'm saying restoration, those areas are not only green, but those plants, the natural plants, indigenous plants, which used to exist in those areas, they have been restored back. Why we are interested in those ecosystems? We should not forget. The green area, green patches will not give you that much benefit. Let me tell you which natural ecosystems, which is more diversified, which is rich in those indigenous communities that give. Why? We know natural ecosystems which contain indigenous communities, they provide worth of benefits more than 145 trillion US dollar. So that means if we want to harness and make use of those natural capital of 145 trillion US dollar, we must rely and use restoration ecological principle. We must identify and develop restoration technologies based on plant and microbial associations. So that's how we have worked on some of these sites and identified those plants and microbes which has shown wonder and help in restoration of these habitats. Similarly, there are many economic activities like coal-fired thermal power station. See, India is still more than 65% electricity is met because of coal-fired thermal power station. But at the same time, our coal, when it is burned, it converts into ash. And these ash is rich in heavy toxic metals. And sometimes the toxic metals may be low, but because there are a large number of different kind of toxic metals, so synergistically they exert toxicity. And such fly ash dumps, you look at one of the slides where these fly ash dumps is poor in organic matter, poor in moisture, low in nutrients, rich in toxic metals, and water holding capacity is very poor. So that's how such fly ash dumps are still economic burden and environmental burden on the society. So based on the same principle of restoration ecology, we have identified the wild plants which are ecologically useful, even socially relevant. Some of the communities which rely on some of these grasses for many economic benefits. So these grasses have been introduced in such areas along with those microbial communities which can detoxify the fly ash dumps and convert these fly ash dumps into biologically productive habitats, more diverse ecosystems, and which has become socially relevant site. So such sites, degraded and contaminated sites, can be easily converted if we work on the scientific principles, if we use the nature-based solution, if we use the ecological principles or the environmental principles, if we rely on those ideas, we can convert these in the ecosystems which are degraded and contaminated into more useful, and we can make this adverse conditions into a more useful conditions using restoration ecology. So if you look at the restoration ecology, there are toolkits. So if there are in throughout the world, this restoration ecology bioremediation means to remedify the toxic contaminants from the environment. Such industry is multi-billion-dollar industry. Let me tell you. So that means we need to train our students in these ideas that learn from the nature, learn those ideas and processes which are happening in the nature, because plants and microbes they do wonderful things in the nature, in the natural ecosystems. We need to learn from them. And once you identify those processes, those chemicals, phytochemicals, molecules, proteins and enzymes which play important role in the survival of those organisms, restoring those habitats, remedifying the toxicants from the environment, so that means you can convert those products into marketable products. So you can just develop new toolkits, new products which are marketable. You can make money, and because I told you that it's a multi-billion-dollar industry throughout the world. Even India now, many companies they have started and working on in this developing such kind of technologies, but they do need trained manpower. So our young and youth and our students should be trained in these ideas so that they learn the theoretical and basic knowledge on these nature-based processes, but they are also able to convert these ideas into marketable products. So once they learn the restoration ecology, so they can be ecological entrepreneur. Let me verify. They can make money. They can also redesign the earth. They can redesign and make the areas sustainable, which are otherwise burden to the society and the environment. And they can make the industry sustainable. So we need to train our students in these ideas. So because they are able to engineer the soil, restore the water quality, restore the air quality, and so on. So we need to identify those toolkits, because we need to have, see how the market functions, stock market function. There are the experts who predict the stock market is going to rise and fall and so on. How? Because they have certain indicators. Based on the indicators, they predict the market. Similarly, in nature, we have biological indicators. If you identify those biological indicators or other environmental indicators, you can also predict the ecosystem health. And these indicators are very useful. They are a product. You can convert them into marketable products. Once you identify those plants and microbes which are useful for restoration, so that means they are the raw material for biological technologies. So these are the toolkits where you identify the biological tools and you also develop those biological raw material into technology. So once you know this predictors, that means you are going to go on next generation restoration technologies. Once you know that how in the nature these microbial communities function, you can develop new ideas, new processes to improve the existing technologies as well. So that means we need to learn from the environment and ecology and practice the same solutions for restoring the environment and make the industry sustainable. So these are the ideas where we need to train our students. So environmental predictors are another areas where we worked on fly ash dumps, and we identified there are certain microbes which produce plant hormones, because the plants are not able to grow in toxicant rich sites because they have low levels of phytohormones. And these microbes, their associative microbes, they provide those hormones to the plants and wild grasses. But what we have done is we have identified the environmental predictors, because there were two grasses, Saccharum brevene and another is Cyanodon. So we identified in one case you add more nitrogen, then these phytohormone producers will be enriched. But in another case, you add phosphorus rather than nitrogen, then the phytohormone producers will increase. So that means the site is same, but depending on the plant, you need to use different soil amendments so that you can trigger, you can predict which microbes will increase in those areas. So such ideas are products, so they can help in developing new technologies. So you need to convert these ideas into marketable products. And I told you, the industries are coming up, but they lack trained manpower who are trained in these ideas, how to identify those predictors, how to identify which grass, what amendment you should do so that you achieve the desirable products. So these ideas can be done and practiced if you use what is a nature-based solution. You understand from the natural processes and convert into some economic product. So the other area is, for example, in microbial communities, the bacterial viruses, which are, there are many kind of bacterial viruses. One of them is filamentous phages. These filamentous phages also help the bacteria to survive in many circumstances. Although bacterial viruses kill the bacteria, but when the bacterial host is under stress, so these viruses transfer certain genes so that their bacteria can survive. So if you use the plant microbial technologies, which I showed you earlier, so then you have accelerated vegetation in a more directed way, where you want the ecosystem development will take place. No doubt. At the same time, these microbes, when you add into the soil, they need to compete with the indigenous microbe. So their survival or colonization of the soil and the plant surface is remain a challenge. But in environment, something wonderful happens. The bacterial viruses, they help the bacteria in certain circumstances to survive. They transfer the genes for adaptation to the new challenges to their host, the bacteria. So once you know those phages which can help the bacteria to survive, you can also introduce those phages along with those microbes, let me tell you. And you are not going to introduce any foreign organism into the soil. From where these microbes will come? From the same soil. From which soil? It's already degraded. So the soil which is not degraded, but it is present in the same environment. So that means the soil which is not contaminated will be used as a reference soil, and which has the similar ecosystems. You isolate those microbes, isolate those bacterial viruses which are present in the nature. They're already helping the bacteria, and then inoculate into those degraded and contaminated sites to accelerate the vegetation. So use of bacterial viruses so far is not being done in the ecological restoration practices. But what we have learned is in nature, these viruses, they help in survival of in their bacterial host, and they also drive what is known as, they increase the fitness of those bacteria and they help in bacterial survival. So if we use the new ideas from the nature, we have not developed this idea, let me be very clear. We have learned from the nature. So that's why based on this learning, now we are suggesting that new technologies can also be developed. So such new ideas need to be developed when you learn the ecological principle. And you can improve the existing restoration technologies based on these ideas. So learning from the nature is the key. I told you in the beginning, nature is first. I'm second. So what is important thing is we should not forget degraded and contaminated ecosystems have transformed the Earth's surface. This is the major change we have brought on the surface of the Earth in the past 300 years. Biodiversity crisis pose a major threat for human survival and quality of life. We are losing those biodiversity. because these degraded ecosystems and contamination is led to the biodiversity crisis. So these are the new challenges which we need to address if we want to improve the quality of life, if we want to sustain our ecosystems and redesign the earth the way we want. The way we want means based on the natural principle. So this is the time for second quiz. Thank you.